Okay, so good morning, everyone, and many thanks to all for joining this morning's briefing on the provisional national accounts and international accounts for Q3 2025. We'll take questions at the end of today's presentations, and can I ask people to use the chat function for questions or to raise your hands either in the room or at home if they would like to ask a question in person. This morning's briefing will take us through detail and breakdowns of the key time series to help us see what's happening with M&E activity in the quarter and to understand what's happening in the underlying domestic economy. Slides from the briefing will be available with the statistical publications on cso.ie, and we hope to make a recording of today's presentations available on CSO's YouTube channel. Contact details are available on statistical publications and on the press release, and please contact us at any stage with any queries. I'll pass now to Kieran and Claire to take us through the results for the national accounts and the international accounts. So first, Kieran.
Morning, everybody. I'll take us through the quarterly national accounts for Q3 2025. So our headline figure is a small contraction in GDP of 0.3%, quarter on quarter, seasonally adjusted. That's still at a level of 152.6 billion. If we look across the top line there of our infographic, the output method, we can see that the multinational dominated sectors, industries down 0.7%, information and communications up 0.6%. And then looking at some of our domestic sectors, distribution, transport, hotels and restaurants is flat, zero. Professional admin support services up 1.2%. Financial insurance activities up 7.8% and construction down 3.3%. Looking then at our expenditure method, personal consumption is up 0.1%, government expenditure up 2.1%, investment up 12.5%. Exports are up 2.1%, but imports were also up 10.4%, which gave a negative in our net exports in the quarter, which is what drove that negative aggregate result of 0.3%. I think that imports figure is influenced by an increase in goods for processing quarter on quarter, which Claire will have more detail on after. Looking at our domestic indicator, modified domestic demand, or MDD, it's up 2.3% in the quarter. That's driven really by an increase in modified investment, which we'll go through in more detail later. Firstly, to try and look at some of the Office's short-term indicators to get a picture of what's happening over the year so far, and you can see that in manufacturing, particularly the modern sector, which of course includes pharmaceuticals, we saw that strong growth into 2025. In production, and although it bounces around a little monthly, it stayed at a high level continuously over the year so far, and that of course has led to the strong exports we've seen in 2025. So not just that, I suppose, front loading we saw in March, we've also got a very strong result in September. Then if we look at our results over time, we can see GDP strong growth out of 2024 into Q1 2025, which is really stabilised in Q2 and Q3. On the domestic side, MDD, we've had 3 positive quarters of growth this year. This is our second cut at an estimate of Q3 2025 GDP. Our T+30, we estimated minus 0.1%, which we revised down now to minus 0.3%. That's our preliminary estimate, as we've explained before, is a frontier release, so it uses new methods and incomplete data. We now have our enhanced data sources, so we have more company data, more survey data, and we can produce our 2 methods of estimation of GDP, expenditure and output, which gives us a more accurate result today. Where this puts us in the European Union, we're here at the left at minus 0.3% in a quarter where most of the rest of the European Union has seen growth. Looking then at those multinational dominated sectors, the darker green line of industry, you can see how it fell for a number of years and then started to grow in 2024 and has now stayed at that level through 3 quarters of 2025. The lighter green, information and communication, we've seen pretty much consistent growth there over the last couple of years. And these really, this is what's driving those strong multinational results. Here we can see those multinational results, and again we can see The dark blue is our multinational dominated sectors, and again, strong growth out of 2024 into Q1 2025, and then stabilise at that level for the 2 quarters of 2025. Our domestic sectors have been flat this year, really, looking at that over the quarters. If we look at them in more detail, you can see it's although the aggregate is flat, the individual sectors tend to bounce around a bit. So the largest one, distribution, transport, hotel and restaurants, flat this quarter. Public admin, education and health, a small decrease. Construction, after a couple of quarters of growth, had a small negative this quarter, and the opposite for professional admin and support services, which had positive result this quarter after a number of quarters of falling. If we look then at compensation for employees or wages paid, the seasonally adjusted quarter-on-quarter result for the total was minus 0.1%. And this has really been driven by the biggest sector there, public admin, education and health, had a decrease quarter-on-quarter. It's a bit mixed if we look across the other quarters, with distribution, transport, hotels and restaurants up, professional admin and support services down, industry flat, information communications down slightly. This really, I suppose, we use hours worked to deflate the constant price series, and it maybe reflects that slight leveling off of hours worked in recent LFS. Looking then at the expenditure side, and you can see it's that net exports, that light green is the decrease in the quarter that's led to that decrease in GDP. The other elements, we strip out the net exports and the stocks and the capital formation related to aircraft leasing and IP, large IP imports and exports, and we get our MDD picture, which we can see is being driven really by that modified GFCF, which is there is small growth in personal consumption and government as well, but it's really the modified GFCF is driving our MDD this quarter, as it does most quarters, as it can be quite volatile. Personal consumption then, total is up 0.1% quarter on quarter, seasonally adjusted, with goods up 0.4% and services flat in the quarter. Again, when we look at this across the countries we have available for the European Union, it puts us around the middle with some growth. I think there's growth in most quarters, similar to the GDP picture. There's growth in most countries there in the EU. Looking at government expenditure, you can see it's up 2.1% quarter on quarter, seasonally adjusted. It's not a direct comparison, but you can see then what's driving that is the voted expenditure up 0.7% quarter on quarter, and current prices, that's not seasonally adjusted, but you can see it's a rise really in voted capital is the expenditure by government in the quarter. More detail on Q3 2025 government finance statistics will be published in 21st of January. Looking then at our capital formation, and you can see that intangibles figure, it's very volatile and causes our numbers to jump up and down a lot. And so we're up, capital formation is up 12.5% this quarter, seasonally adjusted, with building construction down 5.4%, machinery and equipment up 16.6%, and intangibles up 3.1 billion. Machinery and equipment, excluding aircraft leasing, was up 6.5%. This is driven by an increase in other transport equipment. Intangibles, excluding the R&D service, imports and trading IP, is up 63.7%. And the main factors in that this quarter were an increase in investment in purchase software, as well as an increase in domestic R&D. We then look for our GNP figure, take out the net factor flow, and GNP increased by 0.3% in the quarter, with net factor flow of 45.8 billion. So looking at prices, GDP current prices were up 10.8% and constant prices up 10.8%, giving us an implied deflator of 0% in the quarter, which I suppose reflects the mixed prices that we've seen from our prices division, with CPI up and some of the producer price indexes down in the quarter. On the consumption side, current prices up 4%. In current prices, consumption was up 4%. Constant prices were up 2.4%, giving us an implied deflator of 1.6% in the quarter, which I think compares with a CPI of 0.6%. So to summarise our quarter 3 results, GDP is down 0.3% in the quarter. Output side, industry up 0.7%, information and communication up 0.6%, construction down 3.3%, distribution, transport, hotels and restaurants flat 0%. So the multinational dominated sectors up 0.2% and the domestic sectors down 0.1%. On the expenditure side, PCE up 0.1%, government expenditure up 2.1%, investment up 12.5% with modified investment up 8.3%, net exports down 10.2 billion, final domestic demand up 4.6% and modified domestic demand up 2.3% in the quarter. The net factor outflows of 45.8 billion is down from 47.1 billion in quarter 2, giving a GNP figure of 0.8%. I think I might have said 0.3 earlier, but 0.8% in the quarter, and COE or wages were down 0.1%. Thanks, I'll pass you on to Claire now.
Thanks, Kieran. We'll now go through the international accounts for quarter 3, 2025. We'll start with our infographic. So we can see that we have goods exports of 99 billion and imports of 43 billion, giving us a net merchandise balance of 55.4 billion. We have services exports of 124 billion and imports of 118 billion, giving us a services balance of 6.1 billion. We have income inflows of 74 billion and outflows of 122 billion, giving us net income outflows of 47.6 billion. This gives us a current account balance of 13.9 billion or 8.8% of GDP. At the end of September 2025, our net international investment position stood at minus 330 billion. This is the balance between our financial assets and liabilities with the rest of the world. Our stock of foreign direct investment in Ireland stood at just over €1 trillion. Looking then at our current account balance as a percentage of GDP over time, we can see that our current account balance of 13.9 billion stands at 8.8% of GDP this quarter. Looking again then at our current account balance over time, we can see that our current account balance, illustrated here in the green line, has decreased from 19.7 billion this time last year to 13.9 billion this quarter. That's a decrease of 5.8 billion year on year, and compared to last quarter, it's down 5.6 billion. The merchandise surplus, illustrated here by the large navy bar, has increased from 42.9 billion this time last year to 55.4 billion this quarter. That's an increase of 12.5 billion year on year, and compared to last quarter, our merchandise balance is down by 3 billion. Moving on to services, which are illustrated here in green, it's down from 11.4 billion in quarter 3 last year to 6.1 billion this quarter. That's a decrease of 5.3 billion year on year, and compared to last quarter, our services balance is down by 6.3 billion. The net income outflows, here illustrated mostly in yellow, have grown from 34.6 billion this time last year to 47.6 billion this quarter. That's an increase in net income outflows of 13 billion compared to last year, and compared to last quarter, net outflows have decreased by 3.8 billion. Looking at these figures in more detail, we can see that year on year, our merchandise exports are up 17.5 billion, but our imports are also up 5 billion. Our services exports are up 7.7 billion. However, our imports are up 13 billion. Primary income inflows are up marginally, but our outflows are up by 13 billion. And within this, direct investment income was the main driver of the change, with increased outflows of 16.2 billion, which is mostly multinational enterprise profits. Looking specifically then at goods imports and exports, our quarter 3 goods exports, illustrated here in the navy and blue, are up strongly compared to last year and also up compared to last quarter, while our quarter 3 goods imports, illustrated here in orange and yellow, are up both quarter on quarter and year on year. Looking then at the breakdown of balance payments merchandise year on year, the increase in net exports, so here the blue bars, is driven by a combination of growth on the export side across all the three main components, so across international trade, merchanting, and goods for processing, which are all up by approximately 4 billion each compared to last year. And these are driving an overall increase in the merchandise balance, which is the grey line, of 12.5 billion. However, the decrease in the merchandise, again the grey line here, of 3 billion this time compared to last quarter is driven by goods for processing imports, illustrated in yellow here, which are up 6.2 billion compared to last quarter. Moving on now to services. If we look at services exports compared to the same time last year, we have an overall increase of 7.7 billion. This is mainly driven by a 7 billion increase in computer services. There was also an increase of 1.5 billion in financial services, which was largely offset by a decrease in business services of 1.3 billion. Also of note is that tourism services exports are down by 205 million, while transport services are up 442 million. On the import side, again comparing year-on-year changes, we have an overall increase of 13 billion, and this was driven largely by increases in business services, which are up 3.3 billion, royalties, which are up 5.6 billion, and financial services are also up 1.5 billion. Also of note is that tourism service imports are up 476 million on the same quarter last year. Looking then at royalties in more detail, the blue line here gives us the total royalty imports, in which we have a large increase of 5.6 billion year on year and a marginal increase of 0.7 billion compared to last quarter. The green bar gives us the amount of royalty imports related to the pharma sector, which are up 1.3 billion compared to last year and marginally down 0.3 billion compared to last quarter. However, the main driver of increases in the royalty imports, both year on year and quarter on quarter, is the ICT sector, which is captured here in the yellow bar, which represents other sectors. Moving on to direct investment income, we have inflows here illustrated in navy of 19.4 billion. This is up 2.8 billion year on year and 2.9 billion on last quarter. We have outflows, which I mentioned are mainly multinational enterprise profits, illustrated here in green, of 66.8 billion. That's up 16.2 billion on last year and up marginally 0.6 billion on last quarter. This results in net direct investment income outflows this quarter of 47.3 billion. That's an increase in outflows of 13.4 billion on last year and 2.2 billion on last quarter. In the next slide, we'll discuss the green bar, the outflows, in further detail. So focusing on the breakdown then of direct investment outflows by investment type, our income on debt, illustrated here in navy, is fairly flat, which is usual. But we have a decrease in dividends, which are the yellow, and an increase in reinvested earnings, the green, and when combined give us an overall increase in outflows both year on year and quarter on quarter. Next, looking at the breakdown of quarterly profits outflows, this time by sector, the change this quarter is mainly driven by an increase in the manufacturing sector, which is the green, which is up 13.2 billion on last year and 1.8 billion on last quarter. Whereas the information and communication sector, yellow, is up 2.7 billion on last year and down 2 billion on last quarter. Moving on to the financial account, net transactions, there are reasonably large transactions across most functional categories. In direct investment, we have net transactions of minus 19.1 billion. This is made up mostly of direct investment in Ireland of 18.7 billion, with a minus 0.4 billion of direct investment abroad. Portfolio investment, we have transactions of 30.8 billion, and other investment, we have net transactions of minus 5.3 billion. Next, we turn to the international investment position. The international investment position is a stock of assets and liabilities that Irish residents hold or owe to other countries. The difference between assets and liabilities is the net international investment position and represents either a net claim if it's positive or a net liability if it's negative to the rest of the world. Just to note that the navy bar visible here represents direct investment, while reserve assets are barely visible on the graph. This quarter, our net international investment position stood at minus 329.8 billion at the end of September. This is an increase of 8.3 billion on the same time last year. and it's mainly driven by changes in non-financial corporations and other financial intermediaries. Within this, the net position for direct investment stood at 70.4 billion. For portfolio investment, it stood at minus 757.3 billion. Other investments stood at 345.6 billion, while the stock of reserve assets was 11.4 billion. Following our publication in July, we continue to include the international investment position, but broken down into foreign and domestic control to further showcase the large levels of multinational activity in foreign controlled corporations in Ireland. The foreign-owned international investment position, that's the navy bars, stood at minus 528 billion at the end of September, while the Irish-owned international investment position stood at 198 billion, that's the green bars. There are further breakdowns by institutional sector and functional category in our publication. Turning now to the accounts with the US, we first present the current account, which covers merchandise, services and income. Year on year, the current account deficit, that's the navy line, has grown by 6.2 billion compared to the same quarter last year and grown by 4.5 billion compared to last quarter, bringing our current account deficit with the US to 39.3 billion. Within this, the merchandise balance, the navy bar, with the US has increased by 12.3 billion year on year to 30.9 billion, which is a 3.6 billion increase quarter on quarter. The net services deficit, so the green bar, with the US has grown by 9.5 billion to minus 49.7 billion compared to last year and grown by 6 billion compared to last quarter. Net income outflows, this is the yellow bar, have grown by 9 billion compared to last year and have grown by 1.8 billion to last quarter. Therefore, as is reflected on the graph, we have a positive merchandise balance, which is offset by negative services balance and negative net income, resulting in a current account deficit of 39.3 billion this quarter. Now, looking at the net international investment position with the US, where like the US current account, we are looking at the geography of the immediate counterpart. We can see positions in net direct investment in navy, portfolio investment in green, and other investment in yellow. The reserve assets are barely visible on the graph. At the end of this quarter, our net international investment position with the US stood at 1.4 trillion. That's up 157 billion from the previous quarter. So to summarise, our current account balance this quarter was 13.9 billion or 8.8% of GDP. Merchandise exports are up compared to last quarter and up strongly compared to last year. We also have increased computer services exports and royalty imports compared to last year. The current account balance with the US stood at minus 39.3 billion this quarter. I'll now hand you back to John.
Thank you, Claire. So just to summarise our results, looking at Q3 compared to Q2, we have GDP down 0.3%, modified domestic demand up 2.3%, and within that we have personal consumption expenditure up 0.1% and modified investment up 8.3%. So as we said, driving that modified domestic demand increase. M&E dominated sectors are up 0.2%, while domestic sectors are down just 0.1%, and compensation employees are down 0.1%. Looking at the first 3 quarters of 25 compared to the first 3 quarters of 24, we see an increase in GDP of 15.8% and modified domestic demand up 4.1%, with personal consumption expenditure up 2.9% and modified investment up 7.4%. M&E dominated sectors are up 31.2%, with domestic sectors up 0.9% and compensation employees up 0.3%.